All right, well, as we keep marching through the scriptures, we're in the exciting places of Chronicles. I know you're all excited to go through Chronicles. We got another video. It's about a little less than 5 minutes that we'll cover. We're actually going to do in two chunks. We'll do 2 Chronicles next week. Stay tuned for the sequel. But we're going to watch part of that now, and then we'll jump in.
The books of 1st and 2nd Chronicles. While they're two separate books in our Bibles, that division is not original. Due to scroll length, the book was divided in two, but it was written as one book with one coherent storyline. Now, in our English Bibles, Chronicles comes after the books of Samuel and Kings, and most of Chronicles is actually repeat content from those books. And so most modern readers, when they come to Chronicles, they think, wait a minute, I just read all of this, and so they skip it. And that's a shame, because this book is really unique and important in the Bible. In the traditional Jewish ordering of the Bible, Chronicles is actually the last book because it summarizes all of the Jewish scriptures. The first word in the book is Adam, the first character at the beginning of the story, and then the last paragraph announces the return of Israel from exile. Now, we don't know who wrote this book, but we can tell from details within it, it was produced by somebody who lived a couple hundred years after the Israelites returned from the Babylonian exile. Now, for this author, Jerusalem and the temple were rebuilt some time ago, and as we learned from Ezra and Nehemiah, things were not going well. The great prophetic hope was that the city and the temple would be rebuilt, that God would come to live among his people, the Messianic king would come, and all the nations would come live under his peaceful rule, and none of that has happened. And so the author of Chronicles has reshaped these stories of David and Solomon and the kings of the past in order to provide a message of hope for the future. And we'll see that he's designed this book to emphasize two clear themes. First, the hope of the coming Messianic king, and second, the hope for a new temple. Let's just dive in and you'll see these themes all over the book. 1 Chronicles begins with 9 chapters of genealogies, long lists of names. And you'll read these and think that this is kind of boring, and that may be true for you, but actually they're very, very important. The author is summarizing here the whole storyline of the Old Testament by naming all of the key characters in the stories. And as he does so, he shapes the genealogies to emphasize 2 key lineages. First is the line of the promised Messianic king. So lots of space is dedicated to tracing the line of Judah that led all the way to King David, to whom the Messianic promise was given. And then from David, the author traces that line up into his own day. The other family line that receives lots of attention here is that of the priesthood, the descendants of Aaron, who, of course, served in the temple. And so right from the start, you can see the 2 main themes, the author's hope of the Messiah coming to build a new temple, and it's rooted in these ancient genealogies. Now, after that, the author moves into the stories about David, and most of these are going to be familiar to you from the book of Samuel, but again, there's some really important differences. So first of all, the author leaves out all of the negative stories about David, where he's portrayed as weak or immoral. So Saul chasing David around the desert and persecuting him, the story of David's adultery with Bathsheba and then murdering her husband, all of that is gone. And what's left are the stories that portray David as a good guy. And not only that, there's also new additional material that you won't find in the book of Samuel that shows David in a very positive light. So there's a large block of chapters where David makes preparations for the temple. He arranges resources and builders and Levites and choirs. And not only that, the author also portrays David as a Moses-like figure. God gives David plans for building the temple just as he gave plans to Moses for building the tabernacle. So why all this new material about David? The author's not trying to hide David's flaws. He knows that anybody can go read about them in the book of Samuel. Rather, he's trying to portray David as the ideal king in order to make him an image or a type of the future Messiah from the line of David. It's very similar to how Jeremiah or Ezekiel spoke of the coming Messiah as a new David. This is most clear in how the author retells the story of God's covenant promise to David in 1 Chronicles 17. When you compare this story with its parallel in 2 Samuel 7, you'll see that the author of Chronicles is highlighting that neither David, nor Solomon, nor any of the kings from his line were the Messianic king, and that when the Messiah does come, he will be a king like David. And so for this author, these stories about David from the past are what sustain his hope for the future.
So there's a little picture. Now, so the video reminded us that the theme of Chronicles or to keep in mind, the one that we talked about a couple, but the one I want to focus on is that King David is pointing us to the Messianic King, who we know to be King Jesus. And so in light of that, as I was reading through 1 Chronicles, I came across what stood out to me was King David's mighty men. And these guys are amazing. And so I want to read a little bit about them in 1 Chronicles 11 and 12. So if you want to turn there, 1 Chronicles 11 and 12. And I'm going to read just a few chunks of that for you. So starting at 1 Chronicles 11, verses 10 through 23. These are descriptions of David's mighty men. I just want you to just be wowed by these guys for a little bit. Now these are the heads of the mighty men whom David had, who gave him strong support in his kingdom, together with all Israel, to make him king, according to the word of the Lord concerning Israel. These constitute the list of the mighty men whom David had. Joshabeam, the son of a Hachmonite, the chief of the 30. He lifted up his spear against 300, whom he killed at one time. After him was Eleazar, the son of Dodo, the Ahohite, who was one of the 3 mighty men. He was with David at Pasdamim when the Philistines were gathered together there to battle. And there was a plot of ground full of barley, and the people fled before the Philistines. They took their stand in the midst of the plot and defended it, and struck down the Philistines, and the Lord saved them by a great victory. Now 3 of the 30 chief men went down to the rock to David in the cave of Adullam, while the army of the Philistines was camping in the valley of Rephaim. David was then in the stronghold, while the garrison of the Philistines was then in Bethlehem. David had a craving and said, "Oh, that someone would give me water to drink from the well of Bethlehem, which is by the gate." So the 3 broke through the camp of the Philistines, and drew water from the well of Bethlehem, which was by the gate, and took it, and brought it to David. Nevertheless, David would not drink it, but poured it out to the Lord. And he said, "Be it far from me before my God, that I should do this. Shall I drink the blood of these men who win at the risk of their lives? For at the risk of their lives they brought it." Therefore he would not drink it. These things the 3 mighty men did. As for Abishai, the brother of Joab, he was chief of the 30, and he swung his spear against 300 and killed them. And he had a name as well as the 30. Of the 3 in the second rank, he was the most honored and became their commander. However, he did not attend to the first 3. Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, the son of a valiant man of Kabzeel, mighty in deeds, struck down the 2 sons of Ariel of Moab. He went down and killed a lion inside a pit on a snowy day. That these 2 sons of Moab, just in my footnote says, there were 2 lion-like heroes. So you notice a theme, 2 lion-like heroes, and then he killed a lion in a pit on a snowy day. Verse 23, he killed an Egyptian, a man of great stature, 5 cubits tall. Now in the Egyptian's hand was a spear like a weaver's beam, but he went down to him with a club and snatched the spear from the Egyptian's hand and killed him with his own spear. All right, turn to chapter 12. I want to read just a few verses from there also. So verses 1 and 2. Now these are the ones who came to David at Ziklag while he was still restricted because of Saul the son of Kish, and they were among the mighty men who helped him in war. They were equipped with bows, using both the right hand and the left, to sling stones and to shoot arrows from the bow. They were Saul's kinsmen from Benjamin. We'll go down to verse 8. From the Gadites there came over to David in the stronghold in the wilderness mighty men of valor, men trained for war, who could handle shield and spear, and whose faces were like the faces of lions, and they were as swift as the gazelles on the mountains. And then down to verse 14. These of the sons of Gad were captains of the army. He who was least was equal to 100, and the greatest to 1,000. These are the ones who crossed the Jordan in the first month, when it was overflowing all its banks, and they put to flight all those in the valleys, both to the east and to the west. Then some of the sons of Benjamin and Judah came to the stronghold to David. David went out to meet them and said to them, "If you come peacefully to help me, my heart shall be united with you. But if to betray me but to my adversaries, since there is no wrong in my hands, may the God of our fathers look on it and decide." Then the Spirit came upon Amasai, who was the chief of the 30, and he said, "We are yours, O David, and with you, O son of Jesse. Peace, peace to you, and peace to him who helps you. Indeed, your God helps you." And then David received them and made them captains of the band. And then one last section at the end of that chapter, starting verse 32 to the end. Of the sons of Issachar, men who understood the times, with knowledge of what Israel should do. Their chiefs were 200, and all their kinsmen were at their command. Of Zebulun there were 50,000 who went out in the army, who could draw up in battle formation with all kinds of weapons of war, and help David with an undivided heart. Of Naphtali there were 1,000 captains, and with them 37,000 with shield and spear. Of the Danites who could draw up in battle formation, there were 28,600. Of Asher there were 40,000 who went out in the army to draw up in battle formation. From the other side of the Jordan, of the Reubenites and the Gadites and the half-tribe of Manasseh, there were 120,000 with all kinds of weapons of war for the battle. All these, being men of war who could draw up in battle formation, came to Hebron with a perfect heart to make David king over all Israel. And all the rest also of Israel were of one mind to make David king. They were there with David 3 days, eating and drinking, for their kinsmen had prepared for them. Moreover, those who were near to them, even as far as Issachar and Zebulun and Naphtali, brought food on donkeys, camels, mules, and on oxen, great quantities of flour cakes, fig cakes, and bunches of raisins, wine, oil, oxen, and sheep. There was joy indeed in Israel. All right, so we've got the picture of these mighty men. They did some amazing things, if you picked up on that. Killing 300 to 1, and they killed all 300 men. Making an entire Philistine army flee before them. Breaking through a Philistine line to get David some water to drink. Killing lion-like foes. Or killing an Egyptian giant. It sounded a lot like Goliath. He's got the weaver's beam, and he's attacking him like with an inferior weapon, and he takes him on and kills him with his own sword. It sounds a lot like what David did. These guys are really impressive. They're like the Navy SEALs of the Israel nation. So when I think about these guys, and then think about, in the video, King David, and the Chronicles was written, was to a future hope of that coming Messiah king. It's meant to point us to King Jesus. It made me wonder, what would it take to be a mighty man or woman for Jesus, for King Jesus? So, as we go into this, I'm going to ask for permission, and take it, whether you give it or not. So, I'm asking for permission to be politically incorrect this morning. I'm just going to talk about mighty men. And I want you to know that when I do, God needs mighty men and women. So will you hear that? But I'm going to talk about mighty men, because I don't have to say it as often for part of it. Okay. So now I know the first reaction when I talk about being a mighty man, for some of us might be, I don't want to be a mighty man for King Jesus. I just want to be in his family. I just kind of want to be there. And I want to tell you right now that that's okay. Not everyone has to be a mighty man. But I want you to look at it this way. And I read an article about this. I'll very simplify everything to 3 types of people as animals. There's wolves, there's sheep, and there's sheepdogs. Now, we don't want to be a wolf. Wolves go after sheep. But we do need to be able to identify wolves. We need to know that they're bad. And we need to know to run away from them. And to cry out to our shepherd to save us from wolves. So we need to know that. We don't want to be a wolf. And then there's sheep. Sheep don't spend a lot of time worrying about wolves. They spend a lot of time eating grass and following their shepherd around. When the shepherd says it's time to move on, they move. Sometimes they go willingly. Sometimes they have to get prodded with the staff. Otherwise, they just stay put. If they're thirsty, they drink. If they're hungry, they eat. That's the life of the sheep. And then there's sheepdogs. Sheepdogs need the protection of the shepherd just like the sheep do. There's no difference there. They need to drink and eat just like the sheep do. There's no difference. But they also have a job to do, other than just make wool. Their job is to protect the sheep. They need to be on the alert for the wolves. They need to be ready to sound the alarm and to defend. But ultimately, it's always the shepherd who is the protector. So switching metaphors, we want everyone to be in Jesus' kingdom. But not everyone will be one of Jesus' mighty men. And that's okay. But having said that, Jesus needs some mighty men to fight by his side. There's There's a song, we have some old Methodist hymnals here, some of these, the little red ones, got one here. There's a song in here that I don't even know the tune to, and it would never get sung anymore because it's politically incorrect, but the words are so stirring. And I just wanted to read a couple of the verses for you. It's called God Send Us Men. There's actually a lot of young women praying for that too. Hard to find. Listen to this. God send us men whose aim 'twill be not to defend some ancient creed, but to live out the laws of Christ in every thought and word and deed. God send us men alert and quick, his lofty precepts to translate, until the laws of Christ become the laws and habits of the state. God send us men of steadfast will, patient, courageous, strong and true, with vision clear and mind equipped, his will to learn, his work to do. That's beautiful. I actually liked it so much I ripped it out, because we even read it anyway, sing it anyway, and I taped it on my wall at home. Man, the Lord needs some men like that. Every day at 10:02, actually I was with Blake, both our alarms were going off, 10:02, from Luke 10:2, Jesus told us, the harvest is plentiful and the labors are few. Pray therefore to the Lord of the harvest to send more laborers for his harvest. So we don't all have to be mighty men, but whether you want to be a mighty man or not, we can learn from them just the same. And I'm praying that you'll be maybe stirred up a little bit in your spirit this morning to maybe want to become one, or to be a better one than you are now. So what does it take to be a mighty man for Jesus? I have 4 things. I have a 5th one, but really if you do the first 4, the 5th one will just happen. It's sort of like a postscript. But I wanted to mention just the same. What does it take to be a mighty man for Jesus? The first thing is, mighty men have undivided loyalty and allegiance. Undivided loyalty and allegiance. And what does that look like? There's a few things, kind of subpoints, if you will, of what that looks like. First of all, mighty men fully support their king. You see this in King David. He did not take the kingdom by force. If you see at the end of chapter 12, it said that they came together, in verse 38, they came together of one mind to make David king. They had a perfect heart. And it said also all the rest of Israel came to make him king. David didn't come in and say, I'm going to be king now. He waited until the people wanted him to be king. He had the full support of the people. Jesus also does not take his kingdom by force. If we won't let him be king, he won't force his kingship on us. So the full support of the king is one thing. That's what undivided loyalty and allegiance looks like. What else does it look like? It also looks like craving what the king craves. David in chapter 11, verses 17 and 18, David had this longing for water. And as I looked into that, it's actually more that he had a longing. You know, David grew up in Bethlehem. Here's the Philistines living in his homeland. And he's saying, man, I remember when I was a kid and we owned this place and I could go down there and get water. And now the Philistines are there. Oh, that we could have, what God said was for us to have anyway. And so he was expressing this longing. But these men risked their lives to break through the line, to go and grab that water. And Jesus saw the glory of it and the beauty of it and said, David saw it and said, this is too honorable for me to even drink. Like it would just defile it. Like I'm just going to give it to God. But the point is, those men risked their lives because of what the king craved. If the king wanted it, they wanted it too. So it made me think, what does Jesus desire? What does he crave? Well, in the Gospel of John, Jesus said he only wants what his Father wants. And 2 Peter 3:9 reminds us that God desires that none would perish, but that all would come to repentance. Do we have that longing? Jesus says, I don't want anyone to not know my Father. Do we have that longing like Jesus does? Another example, in Jesus' prayer on his last night with his disciples, he prayed that his disciples would be united, that they would be one. Do we long for that too, that the body of Christ would be united, that working together in the name of Jesus? Those are just a couple of examples I thought of, but I'm sure there's more. But my point is, do we desire what Jesus desires? Are we willing to risk our lives to see that his desires come about? Because that's what a mighty man would do. What else does it look like? Undivided loyalty and allegiance. It also means this. Mighty men don't try to set up their own kingdoms. This happens in the body of Christ, unfortunately, often. In chapter 12, verses 17 and 18, these men of Benjamin and Judah came out to David. Now, King Saul was from the family of Benjamin. So David wanted to know one thing from them. Do you come in peace? Are you with me? Or am I constantly going to be looking behind me, wondering if you're going to stab me in the back, you're going to kind of try and form your own kingdom? David wanted to know one thing. Do they come in peace? Similarly, I believe Jesus is looking for people where he doesn't have to be concerned about them wanting to establish their own kingdoms, to make their own name great, to lift themselves above him as their king. And if you remember from reading through Kings, that's what happened in the northern part of Israel. One king kind of made himself king, and what happened? He got killed by the next person who wanted the power. And then that family line, maybe they last a couple of generations, and then they'd get killed by the next person that wanted power. Everyone was trying to get their piece of the power, trying to set up their own kingdom. And that's not what a mighty man does. Mighty men don't try to set up their own kingdoms. Lastly, under loyalty and allegiance. This is all just what loyalty and allegiance looks like. Mighty men have an undivided heart. They're unified in their purpose, and the purpose is to make their king great. You see it in chapter 12, verse 33. It says the people of Zebulun helped David with an undivided heart. In verse 38, it says they came with a perfect heart to make David king. So what's it look like to be a mighty man? Mighty men have undivided loyalty and allegiance. By supporting their king, by craving what the king craves, by not trying to set up their own kingdoms, and by having an undivided heart, unified in making their king great. Now, what else does it mean to be a mighty man? Mighty men have abilities and use them. I believe we all have abilities, but mighty men have abilities and use them. There's some pretty cool abilities reading through these mighty men. I don't know if we have the ones they have, but one was strength. That comes out all the time. They're described as men of valor, verses 8 and 21 in chapter 12. Valor is a strength or might or efficiency. That's how they were described. In verse 8, they're described as fierce and bold like a lion. I love verse 14 where it says, the least of them was like 100 men, and the greatest like 1,000. That's pretty good. Get 100 of you, and I'll take you on. And I'm like last place among the mighty men. They had a lot of strength. They had speed. Verse 8 says they were swift as gazelles on the mountains. They had understanding. Chapter 12, 32 talks about the men of Issachar, the sons of Issachar. It said that they were men who understood the times with knowledge of what Israel should do. So not only did they understand the times, but they used their understanding to advise the king and say, hey, this would be a good idea. This is where we should go. This is how we should fight this battle. And they had strategy. You see it in 33, 35, 36, 38. Again and again, they could draw up in battle formations. They had different types of weapons, and they knew how to use them, and they knew what would be best in the front, or if they should right flank or left flank or come around behind. Like they had this strategy. These are all just different abilities: strength, speed, understanding, strategy. I think we need those abilities. I think God's given us others also. But the point that I'm making here, there wasn't one person that had those abilities. So the sons of Issachar had one ability. The Gadites had these amazing speed. They had different abilities, but they were all using them to serve the king. So are we using our abilities to serve our king? Mighty men have abilities, but they also use them. That goes along with undivided loyalty and allegiance. Third, mighty men are equipped and trained. I want to say that a few different ways. First of all, mighty men improve on what they already have. So, in other words, I love chapter 12, verse 2. These guys, they said they were equipped with bows. They could shoot both right and left with bows and slings. That's pretty amazing. Ambidextrous with like 2 different weapons. In other words, what I'm picturing here, like, do you think they just all had that genetic trait? Or was it in basketball, we have a dominant hand. I played basketball all the way up to 10th grade, so I know a lot about it. And we have a dominant hand, and I remember that my 8th grade basketball coach gave us drills to do in the summer. And so we were supposed to dribble 100 times with my right hand, and then 100 times with my left hand. Then I was supposed to shoot 15 layups with my right hand, and then 15 layups with my left hand. And the right hand, I was dominant right-handed, although I'm left-handed other ways. Anyway, the right-handed things were easier. I could do it all the time. But the left-handed felt really awkward and stiff and unnatural. I'm not naturally ambidextrous, except for bowling. But the point is that I was training myself to do both. Because in a game, if they know you only drive right, then they just guard you to the right, and it's easy. So I can picture these guys having 2 different weapons, practicing over and over. They're honing their craft. They're equipping themselves. They're not just like, hey, he's a pretty good shot, let's make him a guard. They're like going over and over again, honing the craft. God had given them some abilities, but they went above and beyond the norm. Above the norm. So there are people who are very talented, but then don't ever take it to the next level. They settle for mediocrity. They sacrifice greatness on the altar of goodness. In Christian language, they hide behind God's grace as an excuse not to try. Now, so let me tell you this. I'm going to tell you what I tell my kids, and my kids can just hear it again. The goal is not to be normal. We actually don't want to be normal. Say what Coopers are doing very well in that regard. If you're living a normal life, God has more for you than that. If you're in a normal marriage, God actually wants you to have an exceptional marriage. If you're following the normal path, I just want to ask, is there any difference between what your life looks like versus the life of someone who isn't following Jesus? Is there a difference? We don't want to be normal. We want to take the skills, the things that God has given us, the place in life that God has given us, and then improve on that, on what God has given us. To be equipped and trained. It also looks like this. Mighty men take the gifts and skills that God has given them and makes even more out of them. So Jesus told a parable about the talents. He wasn't talking about actual skills. He was talking about money, but it works well in the English culture, English language. He said, he told this parable a few different times, but the one I'm referring to, he said there was someone who had 5 talents and 2 talents and 1. And the person with 5 talents went out and produced more. If God has given you an abundance of talents and abilities, we actually have a greater responsibility to reproduce even more things for God's kingdom. If God gives us less talents, like 2, we can't be like, well, God didn't give me 5, so I don't have to do anything. No, we still have a responsibility, but it's a lesser. We're not expected to do as much as the person with 5, but we're expected to do what we have make the most with what we've been given, and make even more out of it. That's the point I'm trying to make. If we're like the person with 1 talent, what he did is he went and just hid it because he thought that the person who gave him that talent was not trustworthy, not dependable. And if we have 1 talent and if we hide it and produce nothing from it, there will be judgment. So we have a responsibility to take what God has given us and make even more out of it. I'm not talking about like a works righteousness here. I'm talking about stewardship. And last thing, what does it mean to be equipped and trained? Last thing I want to talk about this is mighty men know how to handle their equipment. In 12 verse 8 it says that they were trained for war. Mighty men of valor, men trained for war, they could handle shield and spear. So they were trained They had their weapons, whether it was bows or slingshots or spears or whatever else they had, and they knew how to handle it. They took the time to know that. So mighty men are equipped and trained. So they have undivided loyalty and allegiance, have abilities and use them, and are equipped and trained in all these ways above. That takes us to the fourth one. Mighty men take action. Now it almost seems too obvious to, why does it even need to be said? But I believe it does need to be said. Mighty men do mighty deeds. It's not just enough to declare, I'm a mighty man for Jesus. Just like I would say, it's not enough to just go work out at the gym every day and have lots of muscles. Maybe that makes you look good, but what do you do with the muscles? Are you doing anything with it? James said it this way about faith. James said, faith without works is dead. He said, you show me your faith without works, and I'll show you my faith by what I do. What I'm trying to say is that if you say you have undivided loyalty, you should be able to prove your undivided loyalty by what you do. That's what David's mighty men did. They didn't just kind of show up and say, hey, we're loyal to David. And he said, well, prove it. And they did these amazing things. They did mighty deeds. It's not just enough to have abilities. God gave us abilities so that we would use them for His glory. It's not even enough to have abilities and use them for my glory. It's got to be for God's glory. It does us no good to be equipped and trained and then sit on the couch. Think about when David went to fight Goliath. Behind David, when he went to go fight Goliath, was thousands upon thousands of soldiers who were equipped and trained for war. But they weren't doing anything. They were just waiting for somebody else to fight Goliath. So mighty men, they're loyal, they're able, they're equipped, but they also take action. So my postscript. If those four things are happening, this one will just happen, but I need to say it. Mighty men are helpful to the cause. Chapter 12, verse 1 says, these were mighty men who helped him in war. I think, for me, there are many times, and I can speak for all of us, there are many times that we actually just slow Jesus down. That He would do it better without us. I think I've told you this before, but there have been times when our little children help us with laundry. They help us fold laundry. And so what that means is they take something out of the basket and they kind of go like this, and then they put it over there, and then they do that again. And we actually have to just refold everything they did. Or last week, I folded all Anya's clothes and had given to her to put in her drawer. And so she took her pile of clothes and she kind of threw them all on the floor so she could stuff them in her drawer. Kind of undid all of my folding. But she was helping. I feel like that's us all the time. So I'm not trying to say that, but overall, is Jesus glad that we're on His team? Are we making His family better or worse because we're a part of it? Another way you could say it, if you like rhyming, is mighty men are not a gain or a net gain and not a drain for Jesus' cause. And at the very end of chapter 12, where I read to you, verses 38, 39, and 40, I love this because so the mighty men are all coming to make David king. They're coming to have a great party. They're like, you read all this stuff, raisin and wine and oil. This is what, if you want a good party, by the way, this is what you need. Fig cakes and raisin, wine, oil, oxen, sheep. And lots of joy. But if you notice, they brought stuff with them. They didn't just show up to the party. So are we bringing our resources to the fight? You remember, all of our resources, God gave them to us anyway. They're all His. So you think about a party where it's BYO, fill in the blank. Bring your own chair. Bring your own firewood. Bring your own fireworks. Bring your own beer. whatever, are we bringing something to the party? Or are we just coming there to consume? When these guys came to probably one of the greatest parties of Israel's history, they brought stuff. And I love this verse here. Going back to my main point, we don't all have to be mighty men. But you see that these mighty men, when they came, they didn't just bring stuff themselves. They had kinsmen, their relatives. They had people behind them who were supporting them, caring for them, and encouraging them in the fight. And they sent stuff with them. They were helping them in that way. So you see, being a mighty man isn't for everyone. I'll give you that. But being on the same team as the mighty men, supporting them in the cause of Jesus, is for everyone. That we are all called to do. What did this look like in Jesus' life? Jesus himself clearly was a mighty man. He had undivided loyalty to his Father. He said, I only do what the Father tells me to do. Jesus used his abilities to heal, to teach, to ready his disciples for after he would be gone. Jesus equipped himself. He went 40 days in the wilderness to prepare for his mission. But even then, during his 3.5 years of mission, he constantly went alone with God to get filled up, to get nourished, to get trained even further, because he knew that God was calling him to a mighty thing. Jesus took action. Thank God, Jesus took action. When it was time to act, he did it. When it was time to go to the cross, he was willing. And Jesus was helpful to the cause. That's probably the greatest understatement of history. If it wasn't for Jesus' sacrifice on the cross on our behalf, there would be no cause. If it wasn't for him, there would be nothing to fight for. So are you a mighty man for Jesus Christ? Do you want to be? Are you ready to serve Jesus with undivided loyalty? Are you using what God has given you, your talents, your abilities, your treasures, to glorify the name of Jesus? Are you improving on what God has given you? When you see him face to face on Judgment Day, will you be able to show him something that has increased or become more like God's design because you put your hand to his work? I believe we'll have to answer those questions on Judgment Day. Are you taking action for Jesus Christ? Now, I want to be clear here. I'm not asking, are you willing to? I'm not asking, are you ready to? But are you actually doing what Jesus asks of you right now? Are you helping God's cause? Is his team better because you're a part of it? Now, I know these are big and weighty questions. But oh, how God needs mighty men and women to say yes to these questions. Will you be one of them?